All right, I'm going to break down exactly what I would do if I wanted to get promoted in 2026. For context, my name's Andrew. I started my career as an acquisition marketer. I worked my way all the way up to leading cross-functional growth teams at 2 different SaaS companies, and since then, I've coached over 80 other growth leaders from senior growth marketer all the way up to chief growth officers, and a ton of them have earned big promotions along the way too. And what I've learned is that the people who rise the fastest usually are not the ones saying yes to everything and working the longest hours and hustling harder. It's usually the ones who have the most clarity, have the best systems, and focus on impact over activity. So I'm going to break down 4 things that those high performers do differently and share how you can apply those same things to help you get promoted this year too. All right, so before we talk about things you should do that'll help you get promoted, let's talk about some of the common misconceptions or mistakes that people make that aren't actually impactful when they're trying to get promoted. And probably the most egregious here is when people confuse productivity for impact. This is one of the most common ones. They think if I just take on more, if I do more units of work than everybody else, if I volunteer for more projects, if I'm online a little later, if I'm quicker to respond, that kind of stuff, somebody will notice that I care and that I'm all in and that I'm leading in, and they will reward me for that with a promotion or with a wage increase. But I can promise you at the end of the year, when everybody's sitting around and they're talking about the number of promotions they can give and evaluating the number of people who they could give them to, typically, they're not rewarding the busiest people, the most units of work. Typically, they're rewarding people who create the most impact. We need to focus on that. Another common mistake, thinking in too short term of a time horizon, thinking about this week, this month, this quarter, instead of thinking in terms of half year, even sometimes 16, 18-month increments as you get more senior. Typically, the more senior person, the longer term time horizon. Again, if you want to eventually move up the totem pole, you need to start doing that work now, not waiting until you get the promotion to think longer term. Another common mistake, being too competitive with your peers. The inverse of this would be making everybody around you better. And finally, there's a ton of folks who only focus on their own lane. They stay in their own lane, meaning they're great executors, they're great at their craft, but they underinvest in some of the cross-functional relationships and helping other teams succeed. So those are a few of the traps. Now let's get into what you should do. So the very first thing I do if I wanted to get promoted this year is I would gain clarity. I would clarify and verify my role. As a coach, I get to work with a ton of really smart people. And probably one of the very first questions I ask to every single new client is, what does success look like in your role? And specifically, what do you have ownership and accountability for? And I'm constantly disappointed and shocked at how many people cannot answer that question clearly. And a lot of times it's not their fault, especially if you work in an early stage company where you're wearing a million hats and things are moving fast. That actually might be a competitive advantage where you can just kind of stay agile. But here's the problem. If you don't know what good looks like in your role, and your boss doesn't know what good looks like, and the two of you are not on the same page in terms of what good looks like, it is almost impossible for you to get promoted for anything other than sheer horsepower. And again, we just talked a second ago about why that's not the right move. When I meet really, really high performers, I can almost tell in our first 10 minutes when I ask them this question, because they'll say, here's what I have ownership over. Here's the areas of the growth model that I'm accountable for. Here's what success looks like in my role. Here's how success in my role ladders up to company goals. That kind of clarity changes everything, right? It changes how you're able to focus, how you're able to delegate, how you're able to prioritize, how confidently you lead the projects and the resources that you ask for those projects, all that kind of stuff. So the most successful folks clarify and then verify. Clarify means, hey, are we on the same page in terms of what I have ownership and accountability for? And then verify is you say back what you heard and you make sure that your boss and you are on the exact same page. So once you have that clarity, the next skill is protecting it. That's where learning to say no comes in. And that's the second thing that high performers do. They learn to say no way more often. When I work with more junior staff, so folks who are individual contributors, maybe a senior marketing or product manager, and again, sometimes even new managers, I will usually ask them to list out what their top priorities are. And the more junior staff will typically give me 5 or 7 things. And when I ask VPs or directors that exact same question, they'll usually give me 2 or maybe 3. And there's a huge difference, right? The people who get promoted, they're not doing more. They're actually doing less. They've just figured out what is the most impactful work that I can focus on and how do I make sure I execute on it to a very, very high degree. And I understand saying no is incredibly hard, but this is a skill that you can build. Here's a couple ways that you could start. The first would be to create some type of parking lot place for great ideas that we're not executing on today. A lot of times I'll call this a not right now list. You can make yours in Trello, you can use it in Google Sheets, you can do it in some type of product or road mapping tool. It doesn't matter where. It's just a place to put amazing ideas that we're going to say not right now to. Second idea would be to use some type of prioritization rubric, something like an Eisenhower matrix or an ICE score, something objective that you can point to when we say no, because really we're not saying no. What we're doing is we're saying not right now, and we're making a trade-off, or we're prioritizing something else. But that way, when we say no, we can explain the trade-offs that we're making and point to the receipts of how we got there. That last one is especially powerful, right? So when you say, here's how I'm prioritizing, based on our company and team goals, would you make any changes to this list? It shows a massive level of maturity, and ultimately your career moves forward when you focus on depth, not breadth. So that's what we need to do, is figure out where should we go deep. And this is why systems matter so much, because at a certain point, there's way more work than any one person could do. So you need systems to keep your priorities straight, to keep good work moving forward, to learn how to delegate good work to other people so that you're focused on the most impactful work and is getting done to a high degree with rigor and speed. And so if you're in the process trying to figure out, like, what do those systems look like, especially if you work at a product-led growth team, it's exactly what I teach inside of my program. It's called the Growth Operating System. It's a plug-and-play framework that helps you to run your team with more clarity, more structure, more impact, more speed, so that you can lead your team like a VP way before you ever get the title. That's the playbook if you want to get a promotion. Start doing the next job before you ever get the title, and typically the title will catch up with time. So if you're interested in the Growth OS, you can check it out at deliveringvalue.co/OS, or use the link below. Check it out after this video. Now, the third thing that you should do if you want to be a high performer and get promoted in the next year is improve the way that you manage up, the way that you work with your manager. Now, most people who I get to chat with conceptually know that they should manage up, they want to get better at managing up, and they have no idea how to actually do it practically and tactically. What they think it means is giving a ton of updates. Usually that's not the play. The best leaders approach managing up a little bit differently. At its core, managing up isn't about status updates. It's usually about alignment of priorities. It's about pulling forward major decisions and bringing them in before you start the work. It's about helping your boss understand what you're focused on, what you're, how you're thinking, and what you need from them to be successful. So here's a really practical way for you to implement this. A simple way that you can shift your one-on-ones from status updates to doing more alignment work would be to add a section to your one-on-one document that says, here's how I'm prioritizing based on our goals. And then in your one-on-one, you want to ask them, what changes would you make to these priorities? Or how would you change these priorities? And it's a little tweak, right? It's not a huge change, but it changes the conversation from tasks to judgment, right? So from status updates to using the time strategically. Sometimes your boss has information you don't have, right? They'll share a new context that changes your priorities. Other times, they'll understand how clearly you're thinking, and they'll give you a little bit more autonomy because you're bringing them in. That helps you build trust over time. Either way, you're going to come across as way more strategic, have way more influence, and ultimately build more trust over time. All good things if you want to get promoted. And once you get that alignment, the fourth thing I would do if I wanted to get promoted and have more impact would be to make my work way more visible. Here's the honest truth. If people can't see your work and they can't see your impact, you can't get promoted. It's just the reality of it. It is a massive tool of influence, is making your work more visible. But visibility, I think, gets a bad rap. If done wrong, it can look like politics. You probably can picture in your head someone who you worked with who was constantly sharing updates in a way that made you roll your eyes, right? It sounded like PR. It didn't sound like progress. They spent as much time marketing this small change that they made, probably even more so than it took them in terms of time to execute on that. That is not what we're talking about here. High performers don't do that. They share their work in a way that brings others in, that drives alignment and empowers others. They give context, they share strategy, and they highlight their learnings so that you can apply them to your area of ownership. To illustrate the contrast, I want to share two different types of updates. The first would be a typical update at your bi-weekly show and tell. It might sound something like this. Hey, I'm Andrew. I work on growth. We just launched a new landing page. It looks awesome. Here it is. Check it out. Shout out to James, who did the design, and Kathy, who wrote the copy. They worked hard on this, so kudos to them. Looks great. I'll be up here in a couple weeks to share the results. Most folks do some flavor of that, which is not terrible, but it's also not something that's going to make you stand out as a high performer. A high performer might say something a little different. It might sound like this. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew. I work on the growth team. So quick reminder in case anybody forgot, one of the OKRs on our growth team this year is to 2x our conversion rates. This landing page is part of a broader series of experiments that are focused on exactly that. Now, on the landing page I'm about to show you, we're actually running a test to understand whether social proof or more psychology-driven language has a bigger impact on our conversion rates. I'll come back up here in a couple weeks and share the results and maybe highlight the lessons so that we can all think about how to apply those lessons to other projects. Shout out to James, shout out to Kathy, right? So it's that. It's the same work that we're sharing, but the way that we share it drove a completely different impact. That's the kind of visibility that we need to build influence. And influence is what gets you promoted. All right, so a quick recap. If I wanted to get promoted over the next year, I'd be focused on first clarifying and verifying my role. Second, learning to say no more gracefully and more often. Third, managing up way more intentionally. And fourth, making sure that my work is way more visible. And as a reminder, promotions are not going to come from working harder and doing more units of work and responding quicker. It's going to come from showing up like the type of leader your company needs at the next level. If you want help building the systems to help you get there faster and easier, systems for more clarity, better prioritization, more communication, all that good stuff, check out my growth operating systems designed to help growth leaders like you lead with more impact and feel a little less overwhelmed. Thank you for watching. And if any of this helped, please hit subscribe for more videos on growth, leadership, and help scaling your career.